Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'll be narrating The Life of a Teenage Hellworlder, Chapter 5 and 6, to make up for missing last week. Written by none other than myself and /zombie redditor 9188. Let us begin.
Unfortunately, sleep didn't come easy to Thomas that night. When he finally awoke, drenched in sweat, he could still visibly remember his nightmares. Waves upon waves of creatures with glossy black chitin overrunning his position, with him running low on ammunition and hope. It was weird. Tom didn't have nightmares often. The only time in his life when he did was after his brother's tragic death. Yesterday's events had really pushed him over the edge. Shuffling into the kitchen, he started to make breakfast for himself and Javquois. Speaking of Javquois, she should be awake by now, Thomas thought, turning to look at the reptilian's room. Putting the stove to standby mode, so the food wouldn't burn, he made his way to the door for her room. He knocked, only to receive silence. Worried, he decided to take a risk. "Okay, Javquois, I'm coming in," he said. He slowly opened the door. Hearing a squeak from the hinges, he had an amusing thought. For a school made by a spacefaring race, the doors are pretty shit. Taking a peek inside before entering, he saw that Javquois was still asleep. He approached her bed, planning to wake her up when he noticed that she seemed off. As Thomas got closer, he realized he was getting goosebumps. It was only then that he realized that it was quite cold in her room. Knowing that she was probably in trouble, he rushed over to her side, placing a hand on her head. His eyes widened. She was cold. Too cold. Being cold-blooded really does have its downsides. Ignoring the bedroom heater, Thomas decided to bring her to the already warmed-up living room, struggling to lift her thanks to her size. He tried to put her down on one of the couches, but Javquois held onto him. Her brain was probably detecting his body heat and acted accordingly. Realizing she wouldn't let go, Thomas slowly sat down on the couch, cradling Javquois in his arms. He grabbed a nearby blanket, placing it over her body. It was thankfully one of the 3 days off during the week, so he didn't need to worry about being late for school. While he waited for her body temperature to rise, he thought about his nightmares. Whenever he had nightmares, they were always the same, his brother's death from his point of view. He and his brother had been connected via a Neuralink implant, able to connect each other from anywhere, seeing through the other's eyes, but only if the other allowed it, which is why Thomas was able to witness his brother's final stand against the horde of Chukavaks, lovingly named death crawlers by the human forces. Thomas felt Javquois stare in his arms, pulling him back into the real world. He watched her eyes open as she blinked a few times, before turning to look at him. They stared at each other for a solid 10 seconds before Javquois spoke. "Morning, Tom. What's happening?" she said, and Thomas quickly realized how weird it must be to wake up on your best friend's lap. "Well, you forgot to turn on your bed heater, so I decided to carry you to the living room to warm up, but you wouldn't let go of me," Thomas explained slowly. "Then, thank you. I really mean it. Do you mind if we stay like this for a bit? It's comfortable, and you're warm," Javquois said softly, giving him an embarrassed smile. Thomas smiled back. Javquois was his only friend on the entire planet, and the only other predator in his grade. Of course he wouldn't mind. For the next half an hour they talked, Javquois remaining in his lap, about whatever came to mind, enough to make Thomas forget about his nightmares. "So how exactly did he see you?" the headmaster demanded as Valos trembled. I don't know. He turned around and I was in the tree and stared directly into my eyes. It was so..." Valos stopped speaking as the headmaster made a dismissive sound, throwing his wings up into the air. "We need to know more about the humans so we can get rid of him. His arrival has made it even harder to get rid of that Krakavac. We will have a predator-free school, and one day, a predator-free galaxy. These meat-eaters are nothing but a burden to the universe and need to be eradicated," the headmaster ranted, and Valos could only nod. "Here, it's maple syrup," Thomas said, passing Javquois a bottle of the stuff. Javquois curiously took the bottle, squirting a small amount onto a few odd-looking puffy discs. "Now we pay our respects to the democratic nation of Canada," he chuckled as Javquois looked at him, confused. "They made maple syrup," Thomas explained as Javquois took a small bite of pancakes, chewing. "It's great," she said a moment later, and Thomas let out an internal sigh of relief, starting to eat himself. "So, what do we do today?" he asked, and Javquois' eyes lit up. "There's a virtual arcade I've wanted to go to. "We can spend some time there," she exclaimed, and Thomas reluctantly agreed, thinking about his dislike of heavily public areas. While he didn't enjoy these types of public places, if it was with Javquar, he could at least try to like it. Javquar looked back at Tom. It seemed like her choice had gone well with him, as he practically glided down the sidewalk. When they finally made it to the virtual arcade, Javquar led Thomas to the game she wanted to play. Run, the R-rated VR game, was simple. Survive a monster controlled by one of the staff as long as you could. Explore a dark jungle for supplies and tools to survive the night. It certainly wasn't designed for the weak-willed, with only the strongest sentients playing. The monster couldn't die, but it could feel pain. On the other hand, the players could feel both pain and die. Javquar looked at Tom, seeing a predatory grin on his face. He had an idea, she just knew it. When all the players had put in their VR implants, the game started, and Thomas looked around. He could hardly see anything, with the only lights was being random torches and lanterns on the ground. The other Xenos looked terrified, their previous cockiness gone. They scattered, running through the foliage and tall trees, hopefully towards supplies and away from the hunter. Thomas looked around, squinting. He spotted a broken down hut and began running towards it, making sure Javquar was following him. Tanvika liked his job very much. All he had to do was run around scaring Xenos, and he did just that, his scaly claws shaking with excitement, a predatory glint in his eyes. Looking around, he could see the tracks of his prey, and he began hunting. He eliminated 6 of the 8 players in only a short amount of time, picking them off one by one, but for some reason, he couldn't find the last 2. It was weird, as if they... Bah! Tanvika roared as his entire body was flooded with the sensation of pain. A long stick was protruding out the other side of his abdomen, blood gushing from the hole. From his extreme pain, he didn't hear the footsteps coming his way. Javquar watched in disbelief as Tom threw his spear, as he had named it, with absurd accuracy. From an even more absurd distance, she watched as the spear flew through the air before arcing down and impaling the now screaming hunter. She took a deep breath before charging at it, sprinting as fast as her claws would allow. Distracted from pain, the hunter didn't notice her until she had already jumped onto their back, cutting away at them with her razor-sharp claws. The hunter's screams intensified, and they began running as fast as they could. The sudden dash flung Javquar off the hunter's back, and she braced herself for the painful landing. Out of nowhere, Thomas suddenly caught her, a big smile on his face as he helped her up, running full sprint after the hunter with several spears tucked under his arm. The hunter had now become the hunted. Oh, how the tables have turned. After the game had finally ended, Javquar and Thomas made their way out of the arcade, smiling and laughing about their fun experience. Unbeknownst to them, the staff member, Tanvika, was being dragged to counselling by the other staff. His legs had given way, and he was trembling uncontrollably, with a 1,000-yard stare and a growing wet patch on his pants. He could only say one thing over and over again. "They are coming! They are coming! They are coming!"
Next chapter.
The Royal Expeditionary Knights had been part of the first wave of specialised marines sent by the British Empire, their drop pods leaving blazing trails of flaming ozone through the night sky as they careened towards the surface of the insurgent-controlled planet. Many of the REK pods had been obliterated by the numerous AA guns the insurgents possessed. In all honesty, the genocidal bastards had only been able to control this lone planet. Their attempts on other worlds had been thankfully thwarted, but the Empire had its many allies. Among the many to take a hit from the enemy's guns was 2nd Lieutenant Alex Winters, his pod sent hurtling off course, slamming into others of his unit on the way. Checking the damage to his pod, he quickly decided to eject himself. It was either that or risking being liquefied upon impact. Once in freefall, he was in quite a precarious situation. As he fell, he narrowly dodged chunks of debris and shrapnel from exploding pods, some hitting him, creating large slashes across his black scout armor, unable to penetrate the strong alloy. Finally, he activated his emergency landing jets and relaxed momentarily as the thrusters and air brakes slowed his descent. All the while, flaming debris whizzed past him. Once the 2nd Lieutenant had finally reached the ground, he hastily disengaged his thrusters and flaps and made a beeline away from the impact zone. Dodging the falling, burning husks of destroyed pods, their once living occupants now nothing more than red stains and crumpled armor, haphazardly smeared across the battlefield's ravaged dirt, their cries of anguish forever unheard. As he ran, a seemingly undamaged pod slammed into the ground not even a meter to his right, sending out an explosion of dirt that forcefully ragdolled his body across the muddy surface. With blurry vision, he dragged himself to his feet, his body aching from the sudden impact. As his eyesight returned, he was forced to wipe the mud from his visor, allowing him to see past the tinted glass. The first thing to catch his attention was the crumpled form of the titanium coffin, a fitting nickname to be sure. Through its breached hull, a viscous crimson liquid was leaking out. Most definitely a mixture of the occupant's entrails and outer body, all crushed into a sickly, gooey sludge. Pulling his gaze away from the sight, he noticed blue streaks of energy being flung back and forth in between the screams and shouts of friendly and enemy combatants alike. Adrenaline pumped through his veins as time seemed to slow, his field of vision narrowing, focusing. He sprinted towards the carnage, each step bringing him closer to his targets, his breath controlled and articulated, his suit's air filters working at full blast. Each step vibrated through his body and into his core. As he ran, he noticed insurgents moving to intercept him. Lifting his rifle, he aimed and fired, shooting the enemy in the chest or head, leaving burning quarter-sized holes. Melted armor and burnt flesh created a powerful and sickening smell in the air, only barely cleared by his helmet's filters. Their cut-off screams echoed through his mind as he dipped and dodged through the bolts of blinding light. Where they faltered, he pushed on, further, harder. The Marines he had found covered him as he covered them, trusting in each other's shots. As the last of them fell, Alex and the other knights proceeded to the glowing waypoint on his HUD. As they moved, they gunned down any and all insurgents with no mercy or second thought. The meters ticked down like a clock, each one a dance with death. As they moved out of the charred fields, they entered into a ghost town. The once prosperous and joy-filled streets were now nothing but a burning graveyard. Rotting bodies littered the pavement, soldiers and civilians alike. Men, women, children, it didn't matter. Their blood had spilled long ago. No longer a liquid, it had hardened into a near paint-like substance, truly in all senses of the saying, painting the town red. It was eerily quiet for a long time, enough time to make them second-guess the decision to enter this hell. The loud explosions and gunfire seemed to have just stopped. It was so quiet, so eerily quiet. He could hear the sound of his own heartbeat, the rhythmic thumping calming his nerves, reminding him why he was trying so hard to stay alive. So he could come home alive, be the role model little Thomas needs, to be able to go to the pub with Charlie, his second brother in everything but blood. The very same Charlie that was walking by his side even now, gun up, focused and unrelenting. They moved with conviction, knowing each step could be one step closer to their death. It was then that the gunfire started. A woman half a meter in front of Alex, her armor scarred, her visor cracked, took a bolt directly to her face. Chunks of molten metal and brain matter sprayed against the glass covering his eyes, momentarily blinding him. Even though he couldn't see, he knew that still standing was a death sentence. Throwing himself to his left, he impacted the blackened concrete. A hand lashed out, grabbing him by the shoulder and dragged him away from the enemy's line of sight and behind a broken wall. Wiping the gory gel-like grey matter from his visor, he could see Charlie by his side, firing at the insurgents with deadly accuracy. Coming back to his senses, he pulled his rifle from the ground and popped out of cover, immediately blasting a glowing hole through a young man no older than 18. His eyes glazing over, his body becoming lifeless. It was one of the things he hated most about the insurgency. Their ability to turn a malleable young mind and twist it into a monster with no compassion for others' lives or feelings. "They're on the roofs! They're..." a male Marine yelled into his radio before he suddenly stopped speaking. And Alex quickly looked around. Sure enough, he could see insurgents on various rooftops, about to fire. He was faster. Alex watched as one of his shots hit a male insurgent, the figure dropping his gun and clutching at the sizzling hole in his chest, before rolling off the roof and landing with a wet thud. A laser round whizzed past him, and he looked in the direction of the insurgent, only to see them get mowed down by various Marines, most of their upper body mass blown to bits, vaporized and turned to dust. The ambush had ended as quickly as it began, and Alex felt almost sympathetic for the insurgents. They were completely outmatched in terms of skill. Only 2 knights had fallen, and compared to the 20+ insurgents now lying dead with their wounds still steaming, it was a decisive victory. There was silence, and the Marines slowly began to relax, the adrenaline slowly leaving their bodies as the aches and pains from the last hour came back in full force. They moved into areas of cover, to perform first aid or to just take a breather. He had survived another day in the abyss of hell. "Come on! Come on! Come on! Come on! Harder! Harder! Put more energy into your movements! You can do better than that! Shavquar exclaimed as Thomas groaned loudly. It's because I'm short! I need to be a whole fucking foot tall to have a chance! Thomas complained as he failed once again to hit the target hanging in the air, his fingertips just barely missing it. Shavquar giggled and he glared at her. It's not funny! He grumbled. Shavquar was basically on her knees in laughter, a short breath coming to her every so often. The only thing stopping her from blacking out. It is though. She laughed, not even trying to contain herself at this point. Bystanders tried their best to move past unnoticed, while trying to hide their laughs as well. To think that one of the infamous hellworlders was incapable of something as simple as an arcade game. Thomas took a deep breath, focusing, using all of his energy. He leaped into the air with all his strength, finally hitting the target that had caused him so much suffering. I did it! He screeched as he fell to the ground. Thomas landed with a loud reverberating thud, and even more bystanders turned to stare, most in shock that such a small being would have so much mass. Fuck yeah! Thomas screamed in English as the toy was dispensed from the machine. That the target was attached to. Others around him were confused by the gibberish leaving his mouth. The little plushie made a soft thump as it hit the metallic table, its fluorescent pink color instantly draining the blood from his face. No! I wanted the blue one!
Well, it seems that's the end of the narration. I hope you all enjoyed, and have a lovely day.